So I can't help thinking that the decision by Liz Truss, to block an energy-saving information campaign that Jacob Rees-Mogg had already been persuaded by, had already signed off on. Let's just have a little think about that. It's an astonishing emergence from the blocks, if that's the right phrase, that this Prime Minister has undertaken. She's sort of failed to support her Chancellor. She's under attack from members of the Cabinet, including Penny Mordaunt, and very prominent former members of the various Conservative cabinets of the last few years, most obviously Michael Gove and Grant Shapps. And now she appears to have pulled the Ottoman rug from beneath Jacob Rees-Mogg's well-polished brogues. The Times have this story this morning, which is why I'm sort of struck by it, because the detail is remarkable. It suggests to me that someone quite high up in that department, that business department that Jacob Rees-Mogg heads up, someone quite high up has given chapter and verse to Stephen Swinford, the political editor of The Times. Jacob Rees-Mogg signed off plans for a campaign with a budget in the region of a maximum potential budget of about 15 million quid. That sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Just have a little think about the kind of numbers that have been bandied about in the last few years. I look at the money spent on test and trace. Was that over £30 billion for something that was barely fit for purpose? They promised us 350 million quid a week. The biggest lies about Brexit, such a big lie, they even stuck it on the side of a bus. So that would be every week if the Brexit liars had been telling the truth. Speaking of that, my interview with David Dimbleby on this week's Full Disclosure is very interesting. It would be surprised to learn that his attitude to Brexit is rather more complicated and nuanced than you would gather by reading out a story in the Daily Mail today. Although, of course, the Daily Mail has much bigger problems to worry about than my criticisms at this point in its history. So Jacob Rees-Mogg signed off on it, and the Times report that Number 10 rejected it because, and here's the deal, here's the crucial phrase, Elizabeth Truss is ideologically opposed to it. Ideologically opposed to public information campaigns. It would have included 3 central pieces of advice about your boiler, about your radiators, and about your heating in general. The suggestion was that we could save up to £300. Work on the campaign was advanced. Plans to recommend turning down the thermostat were rejected after the Department of Health warned of a risk to the elderly. Advising people to turn off lights and electrical appliances and showering instead of taking baths were considered too nannying. I am not thick and I am not uneducated, but I am staggered by the difference in the amount of water used between, for example, a shower and a bath. I find it genuinely arresting information, but apparently it's too nannying for this government. The central tenet, the explicit tenet of the campaign would be to save people money. But of course, the implicit goal would be to reduce demand. We have to reduce demand, not least because there were warnings yesterday that we could be facing 3-hour blackouts if the situation doesn't change sharpish. Internally, it was called the Energy Demand Reduction Campaign. You'll understand now why I said the level of detail in this Times report speaks to me of a fairly senior leak, someone fairly senior, someone who is absolutely across all of the detail, seems to me to have given the wink to Stephen Swinford at the Times on this one. He writes today, I'm told that after months of work on the scheme, it was signed off by Jacob Rees-Mogg and others in recent days. But Number 10 rejected it. It argues that the information is already publicly available elsewhere. Truss has also been clear she does not want to tell people how to live, unless, of course, they are Labour, Liberal Democrats, SNP, podcasters, broadcasters, people in North London townhouses, people who appear on the BBC, climate change protesters, people who protest at the Conservative Party conference about the last Conservative Party manifesto being abandoned, talking heads. That's 10. Have I missed any off that? She's very keen to tell them how to live. She's very keen to tell them to wind their necks in, shut up, and just start towing the line. But the argument was apparently that the Prime Minister has an ideological objection to it. One government source has told The Times that it's a stupid decision. The campaign was entirely practical. It was about saving people money. It wasn't about lecturing them. They argue that the cost of the campaign relative to the savings made would render it a no-brainer.